Welcome, everyone. It's November 13th. I'm thrilled to see so many of you joining. Just a note, I do record these. I don't have control over whose little picture will end up in the recording. If you don't want your face showing up, you can turn off your camera. But for the most part, you generally won't be. But if you want to be on the safe side, you can turn that off. Today, we have a really interesting format. I'm actually doing something a little bit different. Of course, we'll talk about the news and the news from the perspective of Israelis. That's always the goal. But today, for the first time, I have a guest coming on. I have Jillian Lederman, who is the president of Brown Students for Brown Students for Israel. She's very involved at the Hillel at Brown University. And Jillian's actually been making the rounds this past week with some colleagues of hers, other students, talking to CNN and the New York Times and other outlets about everything happening on campus now from the perspective of Jewish college students, whether it's anti-Semitism or being pro-Israel in the midst of all these anti-Israel demonstrations. So I'm going to ask her a little bit about what that experience is like to be Jewish on campus these days. And then we'll allow you to ask questions as well in the chat. I know in some of our past sessions, people were asking a lot about what's happening at our universities. And rather than come from me, I think it's great that we can go straight to Jillian and hear from her. So that it'll be in about 15 or 20 minutes. And before that, I do want to look at everything that's been happening in Israel. And again, if you have questions, the way I like to do it is put your questions in the comments section. So I'll just go ahead and type questions here to everyone, and that way you can see in the chat. The chat section, not the comments. So in the chat, go ahead and put your questions, and I'll answer them as relevant as we go along. So I actually want to begin with, I don't know if this story got press in the US, but it's kind of a big deal in Israel. The president of Israel is Isaac Herzog. And if there are two people who are sort of emerging from not just the past month, but from the past 9 months as rising above everything and maybe even becoming a little bit of a hero, it would be Benny Gantz, who I am willing to bet just about anything will be the next prime minister of Israel. And the other is Isaac Herzog, who is the president of Israel. And just to give you some context, Herzog was running for prime minister in maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago, before the pandemic. But a lot of people said that he wasn't fit for the prime minister role because he was too nerdy, as we say in Hebrew, chnuni. His nickname is Boogie. He's seen as sort of weak physically and thin and not an overpowering presence, certainly not the typical, masculine macho leader that Israel can sometimes be used to. Think about Bibi and how different of a personality that is from Herzog. But I think there's an element of Breyer's remorse going around Israel right now. Herzog has emerged as a voice of reason throughout the entire judicial reform, trying to get the parties together and being very logical. And Herzog has also done a really great job representing Israel to the world. A lot of people don't like Bibi because he's blustery and blunt and sort of typically Israeli in those ways. But Herzog is not seen as threatening in that way. And a lot of people really do like him. I personally think he's done a wonderful job of presenting Israel's case to the world in a way that's very factual and intellectual, and in a way that's fair and that makes people receptive to the message. So the news that came out just today is that the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, one of his sons is in Gaza as a reserve soldier. And it just struck me that there's really nothing more Israeli than that, than the president of Israel having one of his own children serving in Gaza in a combat zone. I think in many countries around the world, the president would manage for a way to get his child out of the military or wouldn't even think about serving in the army altogether. But not only is Herzog's son serving, but he's in Gaza right now. It just came out today. And this reminds me also of the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. I'll never forget that at Rabin's funeral, his grandson, who I believe's name is Yonatan, was at the funeral in his army uniform. He was a paratrooper, drafted into the paratroopers like his grandfather. And it's really emblematic of Israel that everyone and anyone serves in the IDF, and that even if you're from the president's family you will be serving. So that was one piece of news that came out of Israel, and that Israelis are talking about. I do want to discuss strategically what's happening right now. Last week I predicted that by the time we met next, which is today, that we would be very close to going inside Shifra Hospital, which is the main hospital in Gaza. It's widely suspected that that is where Hamas has its underground operations center. And I shouldn't even say suspected. It's been pretty much proven by the IDF with photos and maps. And indeed, that's where we are. Right now, the hospital is surrounded by the IDF. The numbers I have heard from my sources is that 90% of the patients have been evacuated at this point, which is a massive undertaking. One side of the hospital, the eastern side, is being left open so that the remaining people inside can leave and evacuate down Salah al-Din Road, which is the road going south to South Gaza. So the IDF is doing everything it can to try to help evacuate the hospital, including offering to move babies out of the intensive care ward. Now, when Hamas heard this, Hamas took a number of babies out of their intensive care units and put them out on the street and photographed them and said, these babies have nowhere to go. Look what's happening because the IDF is invading our hospital. They're firing shots at the hospital. The IDF has denied firing at the hospital. There is firing around the hospital as the final Hamas terrorists try to fend off Israel. But I think what we're seeing right now is that Israel is about to close in. I suspect that by the time we meet a week from now, Israel will be inside that hospital. It's very complicated because there are a number of openings to tunnels that lead directly into this underground compound, but there's also an entrance through the hospital itself, which to many people is the most despicable thing of all. As if it weren't bad enough that your base of operations is under a hospital. They have entrances into that hospital, into that base of operations through the hospital itself. There's also been a big issue of fuel, and that the hospital has been running out of fuel. The World Health Organization has now said that the hospital has no fuel and will have to shut down. It's not able to function as a hospital anymore. The IDF did bring 300 liters of fuel to the hospital in plastic jerry cans. They coordinated with the hospital that they would deliver fuel for the hospital's purposes. And they have a recording of this conversation between the IDF and the hospital to coordinate the drop-off of fuel. However, Hamas would not allow this fuel to be used by the hospital, and the IDF has a recording of this as well. In any case, why are we evacuating this hospital? Well, I think it's a near certain thing that within the next week, maybe the next few days, certainly the goal here is for the IDF to go into this hospital and go down into that underground section, the command center, and it would be yet another important takeover for the IDF. The IDF has currently taken over the parliament building in Gaza. This command center would be the next logical step. Now, the big fear, of course, is the tunnel network. Because this is the base, the same way all roads lead to Rome, we have to assume that all tunnels lead to this underground compound. And we had, sadly, 4 soldiers die this week when a tunnel was booby-trapped. They didn't even go into the tunnel. I think they had just lowered down into the shaft to go into the tunnel, and there was some sort of booby trap, and 4 reserve soldiers were killed. These are adults, men with families. One of them is the principal, who worked a principal at a high school in Jerusalem, and he had done some work as an educator in Riverdale, New York at SAR, which is really a wonderful private Jewish high school in Riverdale, where I used to live. And so we're seeing that the toll of dead Israeli soldiers is not just those who are conscripted at age 18, 19, 20. It's also adults who are leaving behind wives and children, which is, of course, tragic on any level. But that is where we stand with the hospital. That leads me to my next point, which is the casualties. At this point, we are now up to 44 IDF soldiers killed in this operation. And On the one hand, it is extremely tragic, of course, to have 44 of our soldiers die. We treat every soldier as one of our own sons, husbands, friends. It's very personal. At the same time, from a strategic point of view, considering that we are this deep into Gaza, surrounding the hospital where their base is, and having taken over parliament, it sounds extremely crass to say it, but 44 is a relatively, from military terms, extremely low number. And I think it's because the IDF is working extremely slowly and in a very methodical manner. There was this real energy at the beginning where Israelis were saying, we need to go in there and destroy Hamas. And there was a lot of frustration that we were not moving in faster. But I think we're seeing now that going in slowly is so far paying off. There's a bombing campaign to clear the area so that ground forces could go in. And now we have gotten all the way to really the center of Gaza, Gaza City, taken over parliament, about to move into this hospital base. And I think we're seeing now that it behooves us to go slowly. And it's also forced us to rethink how long this is going to last. Right now, what we're hearing in Israel is that this is going to last a year. Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, said a year is probably how long it will take. And I think seeing the pace that the IDF, Tzahal, is moving right now, that probably makes sense. This is not a rush job. We literally have to go house to house, building to building, to clear out the tunnels. Each house or building is scanned twice. Just this week, the IDF came to a family house, a single family home on the beach, on the Mediterranean, typical family home, went into the child's bedroom, and lo and behold, underneath one of the beds of a child's bedroom was an entrance to a tunnel. So there's no such thing as saying that these buildings are safe and these buildings are not safe. Every single building needs to be scanned. The only way to do it, to make sure our soldiers are not harmed, is to go very slowly. And so I think 1 year is probably a logical estimate for the amount of time this will take. This raises a lot of questions about tourism. All those summer trips, USY, NIFTY, Ramah, NCSY, are those going to happen? What happens to the tour guide industry, the tourist industry, if those don't happen over the summer? A lot of those trips nearly collapsed after COVID, when they had one summer and they made the brave decision to go ahead and have the trip the next summer. I really don't know what's going to happen. I hope we can have those trips with a different itinerary. Perhaps the kids stay just in the center of the country. But these are the unintended consequences, and the consequences we might not necessarily think about. But it's like a ripple in a pond. As so much of society is affected by what's happening right now. Now, I mentioned that we saw a child's bedroom and that there was a tunnel there. And this leads me to the question of PR. There's a lot of talk that Israel's PR is terrible. Even on the news in Israel, there's talk that Israel isn't doing a very good PR job. However, Israel has done some amazing things this past week. And I made a list of all the things that Israel has made public, which are really available for anyone to see who has an internet connection. First of all, there was this photo of the tunnel underneath the child's bed in the bedroom. They've also released photos of rocket launchers and tunnels next to amusement parks, swimming pools, playgrounds, and schools. So these are out and available for anyone to see. They've released maps of this hospital, of the underground compound that Hamas uses as a base under the hospital, including maps of the tunnels, some of the tunnels going in and out. They have released video this week of a Hamas terrorist standing outside this main hospital, Shifra, and firing a grenade launcher at IDF troops who were trying to help evacuate the hospital. And they released video of people attempting to flee Gaza, and Hamas firing at Gazan civilians who are attempting to flee south. There's been a voice recording released of hospital officials discussing with the IDF how we can have this fuel transfer where the IDF actually delivers fuel to the hospital. And we also have a recording released of this hospital official saying that Hamas will not allow the fuel in. And finally, there's a video out there right now of aid. There's been a lot of debate of how much aid to allow into Gaza. Well, the video has been released of food trucks being in Gaza, where Gazan civilians are coming to get the food, and Hamas is literally beating the Gazan civilians with sticks. You can see this video, getting them away from the food, and then Hamas takes the food for themselves. So when you say PR, it's hard to really think of better PR than this. I mean, the facts are all out there. Anyone who wants to see what Hamas is about can just see these pictures, these video, the recordings, which brings the question, why is it not working? Why is so much of the world still not in favor of Israel when it should be so obvious, at least from my point of view? And there's a few answers. One of them is I do think world leaders are slowly seeing just what Hamas is up to. Now, these world leaders can't necessarily say that they support Israel all out, because if they have their own political careers and their rear ends to think about, there's gamesmanship involved where they have to appease their own voters and make their own voters like them, and so they can't support Israel fully. But I think behind closed doors, many world leaders now are realizing what Hamas really is and where the money they've been sending to Gaza has actually been going. There's also the idea of, storytelling. At the end of the day, what is PR? PR is really just storytelling. And I think the sad truth is that in the world we're living in, the story that Israel is telling isn't as sexy, isn't as compelling, isn't as dramatic as the types of stories that Hamas and Gazans can put out there. I mean, let's be honest with you. When was the last time any of us got really emotional from seeing a map or hearing a voice recording? Israel's PR depends a lot on the intellect, on assembling facts, on making judgments based on visual and audio and evidence. Whereas Hamas PR is just, full force right in the face. Children dying in hospitals, children with their names written on their legs so that they can be identified if they are killed in a bombing. I mean, that is gut-wrenching in a way that a map is not. So I think when we talk about Israeli PR, the question really is there a way to tell the Israeli story in a manner that's emotional and get people emotionally involved the way that the Gazan PR can? I don't know for certain that there is. I think Jews being killed and harmed doesn't evoke the same kind of emotional response in people the way that it would if it were others. And this leads me to the next topic I want to bring up, which is that Bibi Netanyahu is considering releasing the 47-minute video compilation of Hamas atrocities from October 7th. So I don't know if you know about this, you probably do, but Israel has assembled 47 minutes worth of video footage from October 7th. This is mostly from the GoPro cameras that Hamas terrorists were wearing. Some of it is from the cell phones of Israelis that were recovered or that they were able to survive and share. But it's been so far open only to journalists, and then it was made available to world leaders. What I have heard is that this is the most horrific footage that any of these journalists have ever seen. These are journalists who've covered wars, who've covered atrocities around the globe, and they have said that the 47 minutes of footage in this video compilation is almost unwatchable. What was done to children, women, babies, we won't go into it here. And Bibi is considering releasing this to the public in Israel and around the world. And doctors in Israel have come out very strongly, urging him not to release this video. And I strongly agree. I think we all know that in the world we live in, there's no such thing as releasing a video just for mature adults to be able to watch. First of all, even mature adults in Israel are still in trauma. I mean, we're only 5.5 weeks out. We're still processing. We haven't processed what happens. I think a lot of the Israelis are using the word lisfog, to sponge, to soak up. Israelis have not yet soaked up what's really happened. And I must say, one of the real tragedies of October 7th is that it gets worse and worse every day. I have a friend who's been volunteering in the Dead Sea area in one of the hotels, and what she has told me of the stories that she's hearing from survivors, I thought I'd heard everything, and I heard some new things even today that were so disgusting and shocking that it's incomprehensible. And so the thought that this kind of video would be released to the public and then potentially seen by children, I believe, and many people believe, mental health professionals, that this would harm Israelis literally for the rest of our lives. Because once you see a video like this, you cannot unsee it. And especially for children, this would sear into their minds, and there's no other way to say it, damage them. So I really hope that Bibi does not release this. Of course, we know he has a motive to try to get the world on board and see that Israel is just. I do not think it would accomplish that goal. I also think he might have a personal goal, which is that, the more violent we can show the enemy, the more he can make his case for leading this war and being the leader who takes us in and sees us all the way through. But that is something that Israelis are talking about right now: the potential of this video going out, and what would happen if it would. There's one more story I want to hit on before I look at your questions, which is already a long list. And I think this is a very important one. A poll just came out asking citizens how they feel and whether they feel a part of the country. Because, there's always talk of Israelis leaving and thinking, I'm done with this country. Now more than ever, this would be the chance for Israelis to say that. The really interesting finding in this poll is that 70% of Arab Israeli citizens of Israel say that they feel a part of the country and a part of the country's problems. And this is compared to, I believe, 80 or 82% of Jewish Israelis. So really very close. And this is incredible for 70% of Arab Israelis to say that they feel tied up with the future of this country. As you know, I've mentioned this before, Hamas urged the Arab Israeli population within Israel to rise up against the Zionist colonizers, etc., and to attack and murder Jewish Israelis on October 7th. And it didn't happen. And I really believe that they deserve to, kudos is sort of a cheap word, but that's what they deserve to be acknowledged for this loyalty. Now, the other side of this survey is that only 27% of Arab Israelis are optimistic about Israel's future, compared with about 70% of Jewish Israelis who ultimately are optimistic. And that's a lot of daylight. That's a big delta between, 70% of Arab Israelis feeling that they are tied up with the future of this country, but only 27% feeling that they are optimistic. We have seen, by them not attacking us, we have seen that they are a part of Israel. They are, on paper, 22% of Israel's population, 2 million of the 9 million. So literally they are a part of the country, but I think that we're also seeing that emotionally. And in terms of the arc of the country, they are part of the country. One lesson we need to take away from this is that we need to do a better job of making them feel like this is their country too. We're seeing it on the battlefield as well. Last week, I mentioned that I was in the 188th Armored Brigade when I was in the Army, and we lost the commanding officer of the 53rd Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Salman Habaka. Zichrono livracha. He was from the town of Yanujat in the Galilee. He was an Arab Druze officer, which says so much that an Arab Druze soldier could rise to the ranks to be a lieutenant colonel. And we also lost a second Druze soldier up on the northern border over the past 10 days. So they are doing their part as well, and we need to recognize them. So I'm going to bring on Jillian in a moment. I am going to quickly scroll through the questions. and see if there's any I can answer right now. What I really like is that you guys are sharing links to articles I mentioned and to pictures. Excellent. Thank you so much for doing that. Really, one of the whole points here is to have a community, not just a discussion, but where people can feel part of the community. Um, you know what I'd actually like to do? Because there's so many questions and they're so varied. I am going to go to Jillian now, and we'll talk with Jillian about life on campus, and then I'll answer more of the questions at the end. So, Jillian, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, okay. So give me 1 second so I can pin your video as the main one. And hang on 1 second. Can you do that yourself, Jillian?
I don't know that I can. I think because I'm not the host, I can't.
Add pin, replace pin. There you go. All right. So, Jillian, first of all, welcome. You are the president of Brown Students for Israel, and you've been on this sort of tour over the past week, talking to these outlets. So, my first question for you is, just tell everyone, what is life on campus like these days during these really, unforeseen and challenging times?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. I'm very grateful for the chance to speak with you all. So I'm a senior at Brown University. Like was said, I'm the president of Brown Students for Israel. It's been an incredibly shocking time over the past month. I'm sure most people have been reading about what's happening on college campuses right now. Brown is no different. Right when the attacks happened, a couple of days later, we had over 30 student organizations sign on to a statement that blamed Israel entirely for the attacks against them. We then had protests with over 500 students on the main campus space, screaming from the river to the sea. People were saying things like "Glory to our martyrs." We had another protest like that just a couple of days ago. All over campus, students who are part of Brown Students for Israel and other Jewish students have been putting up posters of kidnapped civilians. Those have all been torn down, specifically leaving fragments up so that people could see that the posters were still there and that they'd been purposefully torn down. I was personally confronted on campus after being publicly pro-Israel and told that I was a supporter of genocide. I know that there are other students who have been confronted on campus for showing open signs of Judaism. So it's very similar to a lot of what's happening on campuses across the nation. There have been violent attacks on campuses, which thankfully we have not had at Brown. But I know of a lot of people who've lost all of their friends because they've been outwardly pro-Israel, who have been scared to go to classes, who've been scared to be in public spaces on campus. We have a very strong Jewish community at Brown, but it's an incredibly difficult time right now, and I think a lot of us are feeling scared.
I have so many questions, but I'm going to start with these two. When they have these big protests against Israel, what kind of students are attending? Is it only students of Palestinian background, or is it much broader than that? That's my first question. And the second is, when students shout from the river to the sea, do they know what they're saying, or is it just a catchy slogan where they don't really comprehend what they're actually communicating?
Yeah, so for the first point, it's a huge coalition. There are lots of Palestinian students, but there also aren't that many students of Palestinian descent at Brown. So it's a lot of people of color, white students, people from lots of different backgrounds. We had over 500 people. That's a huge percentage of Brown's campus. So it's across the board.
How many are on your campus?
We have 7,000, a little less than 7,000.
Wow.
And there were probably over 500 at two separate protests. From the river to the sea, I think that I think there are a lot of people who don't understand what they're saying, and I think that there are a lot of people who believe that what the phrase means is something different. That said, I also think that when people are getting together and shouting it, which they do at every single one of these protests over and over, that they do have a level of responsibility to know what they're saying. And so I wouldn't say that I assume that they know what they're saying, because I don't know what their intentions are, and I assume that many of them, I can't imagine that any of them, if you were to say, do you support ethnic cleansing, do you support the end of the Jewish state,
right,
perhaps I don't know that that would be a definitive answer from them, but they are willing to say a phrase that is pretty unequivocal in what it means. And I think that in that case they have a responsibility and obligation to believe, or at least to be assumed by others that they are believing what they're saying.
So someone just wrote a question in the chat, which I think is actually really apropos. It's, do anti-Israel protesters know anything about Israel, or do they just get their news from social media, TikTok? And I think this adds to the idea that river to the sea, it's easy to find out what that means. I mean, we live in an era of information total availability. I don't think ignorance is an excuse. So where are people getting their information, from what you can tell?
I think it's primarily social media. I think first of all, I think it's primarily social media, and I know for a fact from my own experience that the algorithms are entirely against Israel. So for people who are not specifically, seeking out, if you want to say the word pro-Israel, but are specifically seeking out information from pro-Israel news sources or reputable news sources, the algorithms will automatically show them anti-Israel information.
I want to cut you off for a second and just explain
Mhm.
to everyone what that means in case you're not familiar with the social media lingo. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Facebook, Instagram, they want to make money. The way they make money is by having you on these platforms as long as possible. That way you can see more ads, click on more ads. And the way to keep you on there as long as possible is by serving you videos that will keep your attention. And they decide which videos will keep your attention. And what they've decided is that anti-Israel content is actually the most effective way to keep people's attention. So when Jillian says the algorithm serves up anti-Israel content, that's the reason why. It's that for their business model, it behooves them to send that kind of content out. Okay, so back to you, Jillian, if there's more to your answer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's also the fact that there are many more people posting anti-Israel content, especially on forums like TikTok, Instagram, things that young people are using, than there are people posting pro-Israel content. So I think that also plays a role in terms of, the number of people engaging with the material. That also inflates how
And it's
often people see it.
also the type of content. The content that does best on social media is controversy, anger, and most of our Jewish and pro-Israel posts are not very angry. They're usually logical. They're often loving. They're talking about Am Yisrael Chai, everyone together. If you look at the anti-Israel content, it's extremely aggressive and violent, and that again is another reason why it's just going to get watched and served up.
Exactly. And we're losing the media war. And I think something that college students right now are talking a lot about is that the information that's coming out of Israel is not promoted or spread in language that college students use or understand.
Mm.
So when people on campus say, these are oppressors who are oppressing a people, this is an apartheid state, this is an ethno state, they're colonizing indigenous land. What's coming out from the pro-Israel side or from the Israeli government is not using that language. It's not saying, Jews are indigenous to the land. It's not saying that marginalized identities are much more tolerated in Israel than in any other Middle Eastern country. So I think that that is also something that's happening on college campuses, where the information is just not being presented in a way that's conducive to what college students are able to hear or are able to understand.
Do you think the Israeli narrative can be conveyed in effective social media, or do you feel like the nature of our argument and the nature of social media just makes it impossible?
No, I don't think it's impossible at all. I actually think that there's a huge there's a hugely successful way of presenting information that is entirely compatible with progressivism. College campuses are very progressive, and people have a very progressive way of looking at the world, especially people who aren't already, supportive of Israel. And I think that Israel, in relation to, first of all, any other country in the region, and especially in relation to Hamas, wins that battle. It's very, very easy for Israel to spotlight the amazing aspects about it that are entirely compatible with progressive ideology. And I think that the failure to do that is what's losing a lot of college students right now.
I've actually been to the headquarters of the IDF's social media bureau. It's in Tel Aviv, downtown, in a very hip location, and I've met the soldiers who are doing it. And I think it's so insular, and they're so wrapped up in their own world that what they really need is to hand this off to college students and bring in a cohort of college students to do it for them or to advise them, because you're right, they are not speaking the language that we need to be hearing here. They're using the tools that they think work. And let me tell you, Israelis are so convinced that this war is justified. One of our most progressive and left-wing politicians, who I happen to love, Stav Shafir, she left politics because it was too much of a she couldn't get things done, but she's a wonderful politician, and even she believes firmly in this war. And I think Israelis are so convinced that it's right that we're unable to even comprehend how someone could not. So let me file that idea away and get in touch with any people I know about getting some college students involved. I got to ask, some questions here are about Brown. How did the Brown administration, how are they reacting? Do you feel supported? Tell us about that.
Sure. So I think that Brown has been better than a lot of college campuses. Um, they did condemn the attacks a couple days after they happened. You know, that's surprising that that's something that's better than a lot of college campuses have done, but it is true. That said, I know that there's a lot going on behind the scenes with the administration right now. I've heard that from professors. I've heard that from the Hill on campus. But what students are feeling is a level of silence from the university that is in completely surprising to us, and I think is making people feel very alone. So people have been, reporting anti-Semitic incidents on campus, reporting posters being torn down, reporting chants being said on campus, and we've essentially had radio silence from the university. I do
Can you
know
guess
that
why that is?
I think it's because the university is, understandably afraid of backlash. Because right now on college campuses, you have, in terms of the numbers game, people who are overwhelmingly supportive of, what they say is Palestinian resistance, or very anti the Israeli government and the Israeli army's response. So I think what universities are doing is trying to balance these competing groups on campus. But what they really should be doing is taking a firm stance against discrimination of a group on campus. Students are feeling alone, students are feeling discriminated against, and it's happening in classes, it's happening all over campus. And the fact that universities are not responding is at the very least a double standard based on any and all discrimination of past groups.
I can only imagine if this were another country besides Israel, if people were calling for the destruction of that country, I mean, all hell would break loose. I know you're very connected with other universities as well because of the work you do through Hillel and supporting Israel. What are you getting from other universities? What's the vibe? Is it similar? What differences are you hearing?
It's similar. It's very similar at most college campuses. Everything that I've described, from the protests to the posters, is happening on other college campuses too. I have a very good friend at Cornell, as well as two brothers there. Their situation, as I'm sure many people are aware, is
Yeah.
significantly worse. The death threats that they received there, the very, very weak response from the administration when the attacks first happened. Obviously at Tulane, at Columbia, at Harvard, you've had physical assaults of students. So what I think is happening at Brown in relation to what's happening at these campuses is that we're seeing so many of the same things happen, and then we're seeing on other campuses that it's culminating in violence. And I think it worries us here, and it worries other campuses that haven't had violence, that could happen again if the university continues to take a sort of reactive stance instead of proactive stance against the discrimination and the harassment and the intimidation that's happening on campus.
Well, this makes me want to wonder for the future of these campuses. Do you think Jewish students would ever think twice now about where they apply? Do you think that the same way you look at what the dorms are like and the, city versus rural campus, that Jewish life and the safety of being Jewish would actually be a factor that high school students take into account when choosing a college?
I think, unfortunately, it is becoming a factor. I will say that I don't think it should be, because right now on college campuses, I can speak to Brown specifically, we're having such a unification of the Jewish community, such a response by the Jewish community. Yes, the administration has not responded enough, but we're working constantly to do that. We had, at Brown specifically, we had a whole controversy where there were Jewish students who came out in support of a ceasefire in Israel. There were 20 students who were arrested for supporting that because they sat in and trespassed into a university building. Since then, Jewish students at Brown, a couple of us have written a letter, standing for what we believe in and against the ceasefire idea coming from the Jewish students. There were 20 students who were arrested. We have nearly 400 students and alumni signed on to a letter that we're having published soon about what's happening on college campuses. If Jewish high school students are deciding that they want to abandon universities, that they are fearing so much what's happening on universities that they're just going to not apply, then we lose the game. I think what's happening on college campuses right now is the Jewish community is coming together and showing its strength, which it has an immense level of strength. And if we were not as numerous as we are on Brown's campus and on campuses across the country, we would lose the battle. And we're not going to lose the battle. We're coming together in extremely strong ways. And I think there will be a real effect that we're seeing already on other college campuses, that universities are coming out in support of their Jewish students.
Is
So
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask, is Federation, rabbis in town, JCCs, like, are they aiding you? Like, are you in touch with them, or is this mostly something that on your own you're having to handle? And it might be different from
this,
campus to campus.
I think it varies from campus to campus. This is something that is mostly coming from our own, but the Federation, the JCC in Providence has been, very supportive generally, and they had an entire vigil where both senators from Rhode Island came and spoke. The mayor spoke, the governor spoke. So they have also been supportive. But on Brown's campus specifically, it's primarily coming from students and alumni and staff members on campus.
Well, speaking of alumni, these universities are wealthy beyond our imaginations with their endowments. And, there have been some examples of people deciding to pull their funding from Harvard, from Columbia, others. Do you think this will make a difference, or is it just a drop in the bucket compared to what these universities have and not worth paying attention to?
I don't think that I think it's hugely influential. I mean, you have a situation where these people are very influential on university levels, not just in terms of pure monetary value, the money that they're taking out, but also because it's generated a huge amount of press that they're taking out their money.
Right.
I think that there are debates about, whether taking out money is the best approach at the beginning versus threatening to take out money versus, leveraging influence by keeping the money in and working through the administration. I think those are important debates to have. But I also think that, donors, alumni, professors, parents need to exert their influence, and they are doing so. And I think that that's having extremely powerful impacts.
So here's my last question for you. And it's been so insightful to be able to have you here. What advice would you give to a high school senior who's debating, which college to go to, who is Jewish and pro-Israel, but maybe a little bit weary of what life is going to be like on one of these campuses? What advice would you give to our high schoolers who are going to college next year?
I would say that, I understand it's terrifying. It's a scary time to be a Jewish college student. I would also say that I've never been more grateful to be a Jewish student with this community on my college campus. I think that, high schoolers should look to schools that do have a high Jewish community, because that's, very valuable for them. But I would say that if they're worried about the climate, or if they're worried about the administration, or if they're worried about professors, as long as they have a student community, as long as, the best thing about the Jewish people is how well we stick together and how well we come together when times are tough. And I think that sacrificing that to not go to these schools because of the outside forces is not valuable. I'm so grateful to have the community that I have on my campus. I'm so grateful to be on this campus as a Jewish student. And I think that high school seniors should continue that. And they're going to have a community to come into that's going to welcome them, that's going to protect them, that's going to keep them safe, that's going to strengthen them. And I think that sacrificing that is absolutely the wrong decision. I think there's so much for people to come to at college.
Well, Jillian, it's been a real pleasure to have you. I know that our audience has really enjoyed hearing your insights. And I met you probably about 4 months ago, but I was at Brown 2 weeks ago and met some of the Jewish community that you're talking about now, and they are an excellent group. I do know that seniors who go there will be in good hands, even though you personally will not be there yourself. But you're passing the torch. Thank you so much, and maybe you'll join us in the future as well, because I think as this develops, this story is going to be changing week to week. We'd love to have you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much
All
for
right.
having me.
Of course. Bye. Okay, now, thank you so much to Jillian. I'll quickly try to run through your questions here. Biden, someone asked about Biden. That does raise the question, why would Israel agree to have humanitarian pauses, even though the hostages have not been released? This is a big news story in Israel that we are now agreeing to humanitarian pauses of 4 hours at a time. And typically the way we do it is that we do not announce until 3 hours ahead of time which neighborhood is going to be allowed to evacuate. Why do we do that? So that Hamas can't plan and organize ahead of time. 3 hours ahead of time, we announce which neighborhood will be evacuated, and then residents have 4 hours to go to the store, stock up on any food items from aid trucks, or go down south. Why would Israel agree to this if the hostages haven't been released? A lot of Israelis are saying that we shouldn't have any pause at all. And to be honest with you, I think if it were up to Bibi and the chief of staff and other leaders, we would have no humanitarian pauses at all. My instinct is that Biden made it conditional and said, if you want us to keep supporting you, whether monetarily or with weapons or just out on the news, we need to have some humanitarian pauses. Biden has his own reelection to look forward to, or according to these polls that are just coming out, not look forward to at the current time. Does seem like he would lose to Trump head to head, one-on-one. We're a year out. I don't know how accurate those are, but like I said, there's a whole game here, and my hunch is that Biden told Israel, you need to have these pauses. Otherwise, I assure you, Israel would not agree to it. Certainly no Israeli thinks that there should be pauses right now, especially because this war is going relatively well. We do not want to give Hamas even a chance to regroup. But that, I think, is why. Someone asked about West Bank violence. Yeah, that is a sad story within the story, is that Jewish settlers in the West Bank have been violent toward Arabs in the West Bank. One of them was dressed in partial IDF uniform, but not full. This is probably his IDF uniform from when he was in the reserve, or from when he was a soldier and now he's in the reserves, or he just got part of a uniform from someone. This is not an IDF soldier, but someone who had an IDF shirt on or pants on, whatever it was. But yeah, I think that one opportunity that Israel has right now is to realize that there's some other problems we need to solve and can no longer ignore. Settlement building, allowing settler violence to happen. This has been going on for years, and all the more so during Bibi's administration. And I would like to see personally more pressure from the U.S. to solve some of these problems, not just on the humanitarian level, but for Israel's own sake. We need to have separation from Gaza and the West Bank for our own sake and sense of survival. And the violent settlers are harming Israel's chance of survival. So Israel needs to go ahead and take action on that. At the same time, I do think we're going to have a new prime minister. I don't know how soon. I do not, Bibi's approval ratings are below 20% right now. I do not see him continuing whenever the next round of elections happens. I don't see him resigning either, but I think this is a policy in West Bank violence that absolutely has to be addressed, but which is very hard to right now because so much of Bibi's cabinet are from these West Bank extreme areas and of that philosophy. One of the big embarrassments is that only this week, did Netanyahu meet with the mayors of Israel's southern towns. We're now 38 days into this the war, and only now did Bibi meet with the mayors of the south. The mayor of the largest community was actually killed on October 7th defending his settlement. But Bibi met with the mayors only this week, and before he met with them, he met with leaders and mayors in the West Bank. So we can see that the priority was there, and this caused a huge uproar. But it's also another reason why the public is getting more and more upset with Bibi, and in all likelihood, we won't see him as the prime minister after this. Isn't Hamas preparing for Israeli seizure by booby-trapping as many tunnels as possible? If Hamas Israeli casualties are low now, but will unfortunately increase. I mean, I think we do have to assume that many of the tunnels are booby trapped, not just tunnels, by the way, but I mentioned this last time when I was in Lebanon, we were told that every rock, assume it's actually not a rock, assume that it's actually a piece of, special plastic that's been hollowed out to look like a rock and there's explosives inside. You don't kick a rock. If you see a backpack on the ground, you don't touch it. You have to assume that everything can and will explode and that there are booby traps everywhere. And unfortunately, yes, I think a lot of these tunnels are booby trapped, and so we need to proceed with extreme caution. I don't know how cautious you can be. Ultimately, there's you can only be so cautious. But I think this is why Israel is also reconsidering how to destroy these tunnels. The idea, they've said many times we have new ways of destroying these tunnels that the world has not seen yet, and they haven't really explained what that means. But there've been a lot of options discussed, whether it's flooding certain tunnels with water or destroying them from the air. Obviously, the big challenge is the hostages, which I know we haven't spoken about yet. There's a lot of talk right now, a lot of chatter in Israel about possible deals. And every time a deal gets spoken about, someone else says, don't listen to anyone except the IDF when it comes to what deals are on the table. So there's rumors, and then there's rumors against the rumors. But the latest deal that's gotten a lot of press in Israel is that hostages who are women and children would be released in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails who are women and I believe 18 or younger. So that is one deal that's been spoken about. But every time they mention this deal, someone else quickly says, there's no deal and only listen to us. And so, we really don't know. I would love it if next week, by the time we meet, there are a significant number of hostages released. But of course, we have no way of knowing for sure. CNN mentioned a children's hospital. Yes, there's actually a different children's hospital called Rantisi Hospital. And this was a hospital built by Israel. I believe it was either after 2008 or 2014 that Israel rebuilt this hospital, a children's hospital in Gaza. And it's been found today that it was housing a large number of explosives and war rooms. And again, this children's hospital is yet another example of how Hamas has been using not just human shields, but the most vulnerable human beings of all in their war effort. But we have to remember that this is not a lose situation. It's not like Hamas is saying, we'll use the hospital, but unfortunately, children will die. Hamas wants children to die. When more children die, they look like the victims. They can say that Israel is the aggressor, genocide. It fits into the narrative that they are trying to send out to the world. And like Jillian said, and like I said before, it's so hard to play against that type of emotional footage. But that's in Hamas's favor when that happens. Last thing I'll mention before I tie this up is we're starting to see something new in Gaza. And what we're starting to see is a little bit of anger from the local population at Hamas. There have been some videos of people cursing Hamas for stealing the food, for stealing the fuel. There have been, I think, a video of some Hamas residents literally pummeling some Gaza residents pummeling Hamas terrorists with their fists until the Hamas terrorists flee. Because Hamas operatives were trying to steal food that was meant for them. This might be an opportunity too. We keep asking who is going to rule Gaza after Hamas. I think Israel cannot just walk away. That would leave a vacuum, but it's also an opportunity for Israel to do some good. And just like they built that children's hospital, to invest with the rest of the world in building Gaza. Look, the bottom line is if conditions are good for the Gazan people, there's less opportunity for a group like Hamas to fill that vacuum and take over. It's only when they're truly, have miserable lives that this kind of vacuum can be filled. So I think it behooves Israel to try to build up Gaza, obviously not only on its own, but with America's help and the rest of the world as well. Someone asked who has reliable numbers of deaths in Gaza, non-terrorist / Hamas. The question is a good one. Right now, when Hamas releases numbers, they include Hamas terrorists as being included in those numbers. They've also been known to wildly exaggerate. When that bomb that Islamic Jihad launched fell on the hospital, I think it was Shifa Hospital, in the parking lot, Hamas said hundreds, maybe 500 killed, and the New York Times went with that number. It turned out it was, I believe, less than 100, which is obviously still tragic for the civilians. But the point is, we cannot get really reliable numbers. So I don't have an answer for that, except to say that we can't trust Hamas on their accounts. The world does, though. I don't know why the world would choose to believe Hamas and not Israel, but that is where a lot of the world stands. Finally, before I close, a couple things. First, there's a big rally in Washington tomorrow. I have a feeling that some of you are going. Some of you put in the chat that you will be there. I wish you all safety and bahatzlacha and toda rabba. It is so important that we show our strength and, to quote Jillian, our unity at this rally. It's an important statement. We had 180,000 people in Paris over the weekend marching against anti-Semitism. Doing this in Washington is essential. So kol hakavod. Congratulations. Is that the right? All the respect, as we say. Kol hakavod to all of you who are going tomorrow. I will not be there. I'm in Texas, flying to California tomorrow. Flying to California tomorrow night to continue the book and speaking tour. And lastly, a lot of you have been emailing me asking about recordings of this. I record every one of these conversations that I do, and then on Thursday, when I send out the newsletter Hebrew is Magic, I put up the link to the recording. So by Thursday, you will be able to see a recording of that. If you are not on my mailing list, I highly suggest you sign up. It's right there. I put it in the chat, www.joelchasnoff.com. And at the bottom of that page, there is hang on, I'll make it linkable. There you go. Now you can actually click. At the bottom of that homepage, it says sign up for the mailing list. It's called Hebrew is Magic. I send out a Hebrew word every week and dissect it and look for the secret meetings in Hebrew words. But I also send out the links to this session and to the recordings. And as I've mentioned before, I'm working very hard to turn this into a podcast and a web series so that you can download it onto your phones and listen to it beyond just when we do it live. Although I must say, I really like the live element too, and I plan to keep it live. I like the questions coming in and the spontaneity from hearing the responses from you and from our guests. So that is the plan for the time for the near future as well. A big toda rabbah to everyone for joining. Next week will most likely be on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, not on Monday because I'm flying back from the West Coast. If you are in Los Angeles or the LA area, I have 3 events coming up. Thursday night, I'll be in Los Angeles for a fundraiser for Shayetet, which is the Navy SEALs. You can go to afins.us for information on that. Saturday night, I'll be in Orange County at the Mirage JCC for a book event. And then Sunday night, I'll be at Adat Ari El Congregation in Valley Village, California. If you didn't get all that, just go to my website. You can see the schedule there, or just email me and I'll send you info. I would love to see you there. Toda rabba. Thanks for joining. I'll see you next week. Here is to Beshalom, Betichut, safety and peace for all of us. Lehitraot, everyone.